Well, hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. Welcome back if you've spent time with me before in my cosy armchair. Not you, me. And welcome if you're new to my channel and it's your first encounter. So without further ado, last week I recorded a video where I was talking about memoir, and I said I had some more up my sleeve, and I do think it's a very autumnal genre. Not quite sure why, but I do. So I thought I'd share a few more. So the first one I want to share with you today, this book really blew my mind, and it's called 3 Cups of Tea, and it's by a man called Greg Mortenson in conjunction with David Oliver Relin. Now, Greg Mortenson is a climber, and I think he worked as a nurse in America. Kind of worked as a sort of, I don't know what you call it. It's like a supply teacher, but it's a nurse. You know, you on call, you get called in, and you work in lots of different hospitals. I hope I've got that right. And he also had a sister who had some sort of learning and physical needs, and every year he used to take his sister away with him, walking or exploring or whatever. And eventually his sister died in adulthood, and he was left with a necklace that had belonged to her, and he decided, really struggled to cope with her death, and he decided that he was going to climb K2, and he was going to leave this necklace in memory of his sister at the top of K2. And so he sets off on this challenge, and you know, his climbing's been largely successful up to that point, but he actually completely fails. There's this horrendous weather conditions, he loses his way, he loses his belongings, he loses everybody with him, and he ends up sort of stranded in Pakistan, very remote part of Pakistan, in the most horrendous conditions, and gets very ill. And eventually he stumbles across a very tiny village, and these villagers are living in you know, poverty in a very remote place, and they nurse him back to health. And so in return, as he's being, you know, nursed back to health, he helps and observes the children in the school. Now, school to these children is basically, from what I remember of the description, it's like just a piece of ground, a level piece of ground on the edge of a precipice. The teacher he only comes sort of like once every few weeks, and they have school in inverted commas, and this blows Greg Mortenson's mind. The village is incredibly inaccessible. The only sort of real way to bring anything across to the village is to, there's a rope that's suspended across, or a cable, and suspended from it there's like this crate, and they kind of winch themselves along to get things, you know, to and from the village. So you know, you can kind of see why they haven't managed to create a proper school. So when he eventually is well enough and he leaves the village, he makes a vow that he will go back and he will build a school, which he does actually. I know it sounds like a bit of a spoiler, but it's not really. He does actually succeed to do, and he doesn't stop there. He goes on to build other schools. Now, he's quite an interesting personality. You can research him online. There's lots of information about him. He's been accused by some people of exaggerating his story, but in some ways, I would argue it almost doesn't matter, because the book really gets you thinking about the power of education. It gets you thinking about, you know, nobody can dispute that these schools have been built. It gets you thinking about, you know, how if you really want to do something, you should you know, absolutely go out and do it. And I did find it a very engaging and interesting account. So I recommend this to you unreservedly, and I've passed it on to many a friend. I haven't yet come across anyone who's sort of thrown it back at me and said I didn't enjoy that. They've all found it really interesting. So there you go, 3 cups of tea. Next up is the Bookseller of Kabul by Asne Seierstad. I'm sure I haven't pronounced that correctly. She's Norwegian and my Norwegian is not up to speed. So she's a Norwegian journalist, and in 2002, I think it was, she went into Afghanistan and she spent several months living with a family, and what's he called? I want to say Khan. I haven't got my glasses on. Yeah, Sultan Khan. He's a bookseller, but of course the twist is that selling books is frowned upon by the authorities. In fact, it's illegal at certain periods in Afghan history. But despite all that, he spends 20 years selling books. He gets imprisoned for it. He's interrogated. He has to watch illiterate people burn piles and piles of books, and yet he doesn't give in. And what's really wonderful about this particular memoir is that she gets completely immersed in the life of the family that she's living with. So although it's, you can understand why she's chosen to write about him and his passion for disseminating books, it's also very much the story of the women behind those closed doors and the younger members of the family and so on. And you really get to know them. And I think it's a very honest account, because clearly she's living in a world where, she's the guest of this family. And yet as a liberated Westerner, she finds an awful lot of what she sees quite hard to swallow. But she genuinely attempts to sort of make sense of it and try and understand it from different perspectives. And I think she uses an awful lot of dialogue, and I think one of the reasons for that is because she's trying to sort of almost let them tell the story. She's trying to use their own voices as much as she possibly can. So yeah, again, very, very engaging, very interesting. You'll have noticed that I really love books from the Middle East, that part of the world, and there's another one coming up in a bit as well. But I suppose it's because it's so very different to to the world that I live in, not in my head, but physically. There we go. Anyway, that's that one. And then there's The Days of Rain. Now, I think I first encountered this because it was certainly shortlisted. In fact, I think it won the Costa Book Award autobiography or non-fiction section. I can't remember how they categorised it now. And it's In the Days of Rain by Rebecca Stott. Now this is, I actually bizarrely haven't read anything else about somebody living in a cult. And I suspect if I had, I might not necessarily have chosen this one. But I did find the subject matter of this really, really fascinating. So she's 4th generation Plymouth Brethren, except it's Plymouth Brethren with a twist, because they're a branch of that sect, and they are really, really strict. And her father was very high up in the cult as well. And so for the first, I think it's nearly 10 years of her life, she is being brought up as a member of the Brethren. And it's really harsh and cruel. They go to school, but they're only allowed to learn there. They're not allowed to get involved in all the aspects of school. They don't have TV, that kind of thing. They are in fear all the time of being shamed. If ever they do anything unfortunate, they have to confess, and the whole sort of cult seems to be permanently, each individual seems to be permanently living under the fear of being expelled and exiled from this community. And I think for me, one of the most shocking things about it is that she's growing up in, I think it's probably the 80s. I might have got that wrong, and I apologise if I have. In the UK, and yet nobody seems to pick up on what's happening in these children's lives. It's really shocking. They're kind of almost invisible, or certainly that's how she sort of tells the story. Anyway, the reason that she writes the memoir is because her father dies, and when he's in the process of gradually dying, he gets her to promise to complete his memoir, because they do eventually leave the sect when she's about 10. And what's equally interesting is the difficulty they have at readjusting, just simply adjusting to what we would consider to be normal lives here in Britain. So, as I say, the subject matter is very, very powerful. I did find, if I'm being absolutely honest, there's a lot of prevarication on the build up to the sort of the real meat of the memoir. There's a lot of sort of description of should she write it, shouldn't she write it. The fact that she's trying to look after her own children, she's got a very busy life, and that kind of gets in the way. And I felt it needed to be perhaps edited a bit more rigorously. But nevertheless, I'm very, very glad that I've read it. And as I said, it's quite different to any of the other memoirs that I've encountered. So there we go, Rebecca Stott, In the Days of Rain. And finally for this week, isn't that beautiful? It's Persepolis by, again, I feel really ignorant. Marjane Satrapi is how I would want to say it, but I really don't know whether I pronounced that correctly. Apologies for that. But this is actually a graphic memoir, and it caused quite a stir when it came out. There's since been Persepolis 2, and Persepolis was made into quite a controversial film some time ago, which I haven't yet got to see, which is really annoying. I need to sort myself out. But I thought this was stunning. Now, I have, I like graphic novels. I love things like, the graphic novels versions of Shakespeare and things like that. I really enjoy them. And also classical myths and you name it. And I love Joe Sacco. I think he's really talented storyteller. But I haven't, I can't claim to be an aficionado. So when I read this, I hadn't really quite read anything like it before. And it tells the story of, well, it's her own story, obviously it's a memoir, of her growing up in Iran. And it begins, I think, in 1980 with the diktat that it's been the revolution, and women, girls now have to wear the veil to school. And from then on, it sort of tracks the impact of the decisions of the Iranian government and those people in power, and the impact it has on this very young girl. And it's so clever because the illustrations are quite stark and simple, and the story's told with a certain amount of humour because her voice is so naive and innocent. She's observing these, what seem to be absolutely bizarre edicts being passed on to the people, and yet, and therefore it just makes the behaviour of the people in power seem rather ludicrous. She's not laughing it off, but she's sort of exposing how foolish and irrational a lot of their decisions are. There's a lovely example at the beginning, actually, I'll show you, where with the description of the veil, and so she's got, I hope you can see this, so she's got a picture of herself there, age 10, and her classmates, and she's even made sure that she's sort of coming off the frame of the picture because they've all suddenly got to go to school in veils and they don't like it. And then down here at the bottom, you've got this playground scene, and the girls are saying things to each other like, it's too hot, and, throwing the veil in the air as a child might. And then somebody else has got their veil over their head and they're pretending to be a monster because they're wearing the veil. And then there's a little girl over here, if you can make her out, and she's using the veil as a skipping rope. And it's that whole sort of wealth of innocence and childishness that runs through this. I mean, she matures, obviously, there's an amazing moment when, I don't know if I can find it, when when they're bombed for the first time. This is the trouble. I need to put my glasses on. I'm trying to find the picture because it's quite sort of. Where is it? Don't know if I can find it. Sorry about that. I had a bit of an interruption by an alarm that I'd forgotten was going to go off, and I still haven't found the little bit that I wanted to show you. But basically, it's the Iraqis have been bombing them, and her father's come home from work, and you can see this kind of puddle of water, because it's obviously sort of been raining, and she sort of says, "Daddy, you know, the bombs have been falling," and he says something about, "Oh, well, I better go and get changed then." You know, it's that whole sort of family routine being juxtaposed with the horrors of war. So I commend Persepolis to you. There it is. I hope you've found some of those recommendations of interest. Please keep letting me know what you thought about the post last week, and also obviously I'd love to know what you think of this too. So take care, everybody. Have a lovely week, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye.